2 more weeks until President Trump decides about U.S. involvement in Iran, what Americans in harm's way can expect. And some Republicans would like to sell off parts of the American West. We'll hear from a conservative who says the amber waves of grain should be off limits. Hello, I'm Ed O'Keefe, in for Major Garrett here in Washington on this Juneteenth. Welcome to the Takeout. Within the next 2 weeks, that's when the White House says President Trump will make a decision on whether the U.S. should join Israel in its military operations against Iran. The 14-day clock counting down now as diplomatic attempts to stave off a wider war are kicking into gear. Now, if the 2 weeks' notice sounds familiar, it's because he's pushed off decisions like this several times before.
We're going to be announcing something, I would say, over the next 2 or 3 weeks that will be phenomenal in terms of tax. I will make that decision, I would say, over the next 2 weeks, probably right after the G20. I can't tell you that, but I'll let you know in about 2 weeks.
2 weeks for decisions on taxes, infrastructure, and what to do about ISIS in his first presidency. Some of those deadlines were met, others were not. In his second go-round, he recently gave Vladimir Putin 2 weeks to prove he was serious about ending the Ukraine war. That deadline has come and gone. And just last week, he said he'd be sending letters regarding new tariff rates to several countries in 2 weeks. So the clock's still ticking on that one. The world has held its breath this week, watching, waiting, wondering whether President Trump is serious and on the verge of directly attacking Iran and making a potentially legacy-shaping decision. So is this just yet another 2-week tease that peters out before the White House moves on to the next subject? Time will tell. We've only got about 14 days or 330 or so hours until we find out. Deborah Patta joins us now from Tel Aviv. And as we turn to Deborah, let's hear how the White House press secretary today announced this 2-week timetable to the world. Take a listen.
Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks.
Deborah, how are the Israelis and the Iranians responding to Trump's 2-week deadline?
Well, there will probably be a lot of senior Israeli government officials who are hoping for a decision more quickly than 2 weeks. And once again today, you saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu almost baiting President Trump. It's clear Israel wants a military response. Let's listen to what Netanyahu had to say.
Gave them the chance to do it through negotiations. They strung him along. You don't string along Donald Trump. He knows the game. And I think that we're both committed to making sure that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and they won't.
Now, as for Iran, they have warned of serious consequences if the U.S. gets involved in this war. But at the same time, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, will meet with his counterparts from France, Germany, and the UK in another diplomatic push.
And we'll see how that goes on Friday. Now, you're standing there in Tel Aviv, which, of course, is a major cosmopolitan city, a big tourist attraction for many around the world. But how much damage are the Iranian strikes causing there in Tel Aviv and across Israel?
Well, the human cost of this war has escalated, with at least 24 killed in Israel, but significantly higher in Iran, with rights groups putting the death toll there over 600. Israel has a very sophisticated air defense system, but it is not invincible. And some of those missiles break through. Just today, we saw an Iranian missile hit a hospital in Beersheba. There were minor injuries as the patients and medical staff were all in bomb shelters, but serious damage to the old surgical unit. And there is also a concern that Israel is tearing through its defensive weapons, known as the Arrow interceptors, which take out Iranian missiles 2 or 3 times a day.
All right. Well, we'll continue to monitor how the two countries attack each other. Deborah Patta and our team there in Tel Aviv, thank you for now. Let's bring in our chief foreign affairs correspondent and the moderator of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, who joins me here in Washington. Great to see you. CBS has reported today that the president has been briefed on the risks and benefits of potentially attacking the Fordow nuclear site there in just about 60 miles southwest of Tehran, including, taking that facility out with whatever it would take. What are the risks being weighed right now by the White House as they consider this?
Well, it is so interesting you put your finger on the hurry up and wait nature of this. If this was an immediate emergency, it couldn't wait 2 weeks, right?
Right.
So when we look at that question of Fordow and what was happening there, this is deep underground mountain terrain, the facilities that could only be taken out, U.S. military assessments are by the kind of bunker buster bomb the United States has, Israel doesn't. But what beyond that? When the U.S. gets involved, what are the second and third order effects of that? That's what diplomats are talking about here, which is to say the Israeli prime minister may not be worried about what happens next, but the United States, if they get directly involved, may have to be.
Yeah.
If you kill the supreme leader, for example, and there's a power vacuum, if there's an infighting there that happens, what is the next stage here? Who secures the nuclear sites and the nuclear material? IAEA inspectors from the UN are already in the country, but can they actually do it on their own without support? What are the impacts on the allies in the region? So it's not just a one and done scenario. And that's one of the things that has been talked about in the past few days. And I am told that is one of the things that diplomats really want to talk through here. We know that today the UK Foreign Secretary was meeting with Secretary of State Rubio at the White House about this sort of last-ditch proposal the United States is putting forward for a direct negotiation. The Italian foreign minister announced that the U.S. wants direct talks. So President Trump is still giving diplomacy a shot, even if the Israeli prime minister thinks he's getting strung along. There are those who question whether the Israeli prime minister's jamming Donald Trump.
Exactly, yeah. Now, we know the president approves some kind of military operations on Tuesday night. Do we have any sense of what that includes, what it would involve?
Well, our James Laporta has done some great reporting on this, along with Ellie Watson, to talk about the assets that are being moved into the region. But you need more than just refueling equipment to carry out the kind of attack to take out Fordow. The B-2 bombers, our last reporting is that they have not been moved into the region. They would fly from various positions, one of them just about 6 hours away in the Indian Ocean. But in terms of that detail, what matters here is giving the president military options also underscores the diplomatic way out, because the best chance at diplomacy is when it's backed by that credible use of force. And that threat is building for President Trump should he choose to take it. But he's clearly hoping he won't have to.
Yeah.
And you have these talks in Geneva tomorrow led by European ministers who are really trying to help the United States find an off-ramp.
But the latest guidance we have is that Steve Witkoff, the Mideast envoy, is not going to those meetings, right?
That's the latest guidance we have. He has been reaching out to the Iranian foreign minister. I'm told through Iranian officials it's very hard just to get signals working, frankly, on international calls and uplinks. We don't even know how the Iranian foreign minister is going to manage to make it to Geneva, get through airspace at this point. But that's why it's so important to watch what happens with the UK foreign secretary, who was here in the United States and now flying directly to Geneva. Does he have a U.S. proposal in his pocket? Is he actually going to be the messenger on behalf of the United States? The UK likes to often think of themselves as that. Yep. So we will have to watch Geneva, not just for what the Europeans negotiate, but if it gives a sense of the diplomacy the U.S. could put forward. And we have some of the details of the proposals that the U.S. has put forward.
And it basically, bottom line is no more nuclear enrichment. Is that even viable to most of the world?
Well, the nuclear enrichment they have now, the United States is saying absolutely not. And if you want a civilian nuclear program, you're going to have to buy the enriched stuff from elsewhere. And Iran hasn't agreed to that. But there are many different ways to get to this kind of compromise agreement. The Omanis had proposed, putting a facility in a consortium in an area where other Arab states also used it. Is there a way to have the Iranians save face, to say, we still have a nuclear program, we weren't bombed to submission? But it gets us back to that other tension here between the United States and Israel. It seems in many ways the Israeli government is pushing for regime change. And there are concerns in the region of what that would look like if it is instigated from the outside, and what else it would mean, and if tomorrow looks any different. And by the way, does this cause a sprint towards creating the bomb that the U.S. says they hadn't created?
To begin with, yeah. Well, we'll be watching Geneva. I know you'll be watching it. And of course, you'll have more Sunday on Face the Nation in the coming days. Margaret Brennan, thank you. We are joined now by Daniel Shapiro, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Israel in the Obama administration. Mr. Shapiro, thank you for being with us. I want to start by playing a little more of what Prime Minister Netanyahu said today in praising President Trump. Take a listen.
President Trump will do what's best for America. I trust his judgment. He's a tremendous friend, a tremendous world leader, a tremendous friend of Israel and the Jewish people. And we will do what we have to do, and we are doing it.
What, if any, effect do you think those comments from the Prime Minister are having on the president's decision-making?
Thanks for having me, Ed. Look, I think the president has to not be swayed by how a foreign leader speaks about him or of him, and really focus on what the U.S. interest is and what the outcome we want to achieve is. The outcome that he set as his goal in the negotiations that preceded the Israeli operation was ending all enrichment in Iran. And that is the way you would ensure that Iran would never be able to have a nuclear weapon. And it really comes down to that underground site at Fordo. Now, we know that the U.S. has unique capabilities, bunker busting capabilities to get to that site different from Israel's. Now, by making clear that he has that option available, by putting in place the forces necessary, he's opened a window of time, fairly narrow, to make clear to the Iranians, and it should be presented this way. You're going to have to give that facility up one way or the other. You can give it up in this window of time through diplomacy, maybe this meeting with the European foreign ministers tomorrow in Geneva. Maybe it'll be supplemented by some Gulf states who are allies of the United States going to Iran and saying, look, you really have to take this deal that's being offered to you. Otherwise, it will be this facility will be destroyed. But then he has to be willing to back that up if Iran says no. So we have a window of time to either get what we need through diplomacy, and if not, then to do it through military force.
Earlier today, the White House press secretary had this to say about Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Iran has all that it needs to achieve a nuclear weapon. All they need is a decision from the supreme leader to do that. And it would take a couple of weeks to complete the production of that weapon, which would, of course, pose an existential threat, not just to Israel, but to the United States and to the entire world.
Based on your knowledge of the situation, do you agree with her assessment?
I don't have access to the most recent intelligence, but I served in the government until January. And everything we know about the Iranian nuclear program tells us they are very, very close to this capability. First of all, the International Atomic Energy Agency has documented that Iran has about 10 bombs worth of 60% enriched uranium, and the ability on days' notice to enrich that further to 90%, which is weapons grade. So on enrichment, they're basically there. Then we know that they have taken steps to do research and get other technologies organized so that if the supreme leader gave the order to weaponize, to actually build a weapon with that enriched uranium, they would be able to do it in a fairly short period of time, and they've gotten that time progressively smaller. So I don't know if it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but it's too close for comfort for a regime that openly calls for Israel's destruction, that has twice last year conducted a blatant act of war, massive barrages of missiles and drones against Israel, that arms proxies around the region. It's simply too close for comfort to allow them to get that close. And that's why the standard of no enrichment, where that means no ability to build a nuclear weapon, is the right one.
And of course, we forget how often the Iranian Revolutionary Guard was involved in targeting or killing American forces in Iraq back in the day as well. So there's that. Now, you served in the Obama administration when the former president reached his nuclear deal with Iran. I know it's hard playing what if, but it is part of the political debate, and it will be in the coming days. Where do you think we'd be if the Trump administration hadn't withdrawn from the U.S. agreement cut by the Obama administration back in 2018?
You know, when I was ambassador and I spoke to a lot of very skeptical Israelis about that agreement in 2015, I said, look, this isn't a perfect agreement. It doesn't solve everything. It buys time. It pushes Iran at least a year from the ability to produce a nuclear weapon and will keep them there for 10 to 15 years. So that was valuable, but there was legitimate concern and criticism of the deal that at the end of that 10 or 15 years, they might then be in a position to rush to break out to a weapon with an industrial scale enrichment program. When President Trump withdrew from the agreement in 2018, which I thought was a mistake, he basically shortened that time. And so we face this crisis today in 2025 that we might have otherwise faced in 2030. So it's not a huge difference in the sense that we probably would have reached this point sooner or later. But I don't want us to be hung up on having this debate about history. That's too much of the focus of the conversation. What did Obama do? What did Trump do in 2018? Who was right? Who was wrong? We should really be focused on the outcome we want. And the outcome we need is ensuring that Iran has no enrichment capability. That's the only way we'll be certain that they will not, at some point at a time of their choosing, put together this nuclear weapon and pose this existential threat to Israel and to other nations, to our allies and friends, and potentially to even U.S. people in that region as well.
Well, former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Daniel Shapiro, thank you for stopping by. We'll continue having this conversation. We appreciate your perspective today. Still to come, public land in private hands. Could some of our nation's most beautiful and popular outdoor recreation areas soon be up for sale? We take a look at Congress's plan.
We're entering a scary time under the Trump administration.
Congressman Greg Casar, the Democrat from Texas, on the growing number of lawmakers clashing with law enforcement over the president's deportation operations. And as a new wave of missiles from Iran hit an Israeli hospital, we go inside the largest Iranian ballistic missile attack against Americans to date. And hear from a soldier who was there in 2020. That's next on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. This is not the first time in recent years the U.S. and Iran have been what feels like pretty close to war. In January of 2020, you may recall, after the U.S. killed Iran's top general, Iran responded with the largest ever ballistic missile attack on Americans. Now retired United States Army Lieutenant Colonel Alan Johnson was at the intended target, a military base in Iraq. He recorded this video for his son, preparing for the worst.
Hey, buddy. If you're seeing this video, some bad things happened to Dad last night. So I need you to be strong, okay? For Mom. And just always know in your heart that I love you.
Retired United States Army Lieutenant Colonel Alan Johnson is here now. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to have you first remind our viewers about that experience in January 2020.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, that was an emotional moment. I decided to record that on my way to the bunker after we had prepared for an imminent attack with intelligence that had told us basically that we were likely not going to survive this attack due to the number of missiles coming in. And that was kind of my last chance to send a message home.
This was at the Al-Assad base in Iraq, a sprawling complex at the time where U.S. forces were based, and there had been intelligence collected that said it was going to come under attack from Iran because of the killing of General Soleimani. And I guess, you know, you've heard in the last few days that the United States has evacuated non-essential personnel from the embassy in Baghdad, that others at military installations across the region are being told to go home if their family are non-essential personnel. As you hear that and reflect on what happened to you and your colleagues all those years ago, what are your concerns about how U.S. installations, U.S. interests might get targeted again in the region?
Well, I think we've learned a lot of lessons from that event. You know, I've been retired now for just over a year, and this was 5 years ago. I would be willing to guarantee that our force protection at those bases is much improved from when it was in 2020. So the survivability is probably a lot better than what we were facing. We really had no air defense at that base at that time.
I got to believe they're using what happened at Al-Assad now as sort of a model for what to either anticipate or do better than the next time if it comes, right?
Correct. Yes, and I haven't been read in on any intelligence for quite some time now, so I would imagine I can imagine what the improvements are, and they're good. That's what needed to happen. You know, we took 11 missiles that night, and these are medium-range ballistic missiles that are about 40 feet tall, and they have nearly 2,000 pounds of high explosive ordnance on them. We had 7 land in close proximity to myself and my troops there. The closest being 20 meters away. So 60 feet away was where number 6 actually hit. And I can't even explain to you what it's like to absorb that percussive force from 2,000 pounds of high explosive going off 60 feet away from you. We're lucky to be alive.
Now, you and others, yeah, no, there's absolutely no doubt about that. And of course, you've suffered in the years since from, as you've said in the past, PTSD, headaches. There were traumatic brain injuries to yourself and to other colleagues. There was concern back in 2020 because then President Trump was criticized for downplaying the injuries of troops at the base. He called them just headaches. Does that make you at all concerned about how he may be processing and working through all of this again at this critical time?
Not really. There's a reason for that. I actually briefed the president from the battlefield during that time, and essentially the morning after the attack, no one wanted help. Everybody wants to stay in the fight, and they don't want to be that guy or that soldier that gets taken out for medical reason. So theoretically, we didn't have any, thankfully, no killed in action, and no one wanted to be seen. So we really, at first, didn't have any wounded in action even. So technically, we didn't have any casualties. That, however, did change over the coming hours and days, where we were inundated with people that tried to deal with their new mild traumatic brain injury on their own and failed miserably, coming back to the clinic saying, hey, I'm getting worse. I can't stop throwing up. I have imbalance. I have anxiety. And that's when we kind of realized that we had this mass casualty event of traumatic brain injury. And if you can remember back in 2020, those numbers kept going up as the week went on, and people were wondering, well, what's going on here? It's because eventually soldiers were throwing in the towel and coming to see us.
Right. And generally speaking, quickly, how are you and your fellow soldiers doing all these years later?
Well, these are long-lasting effects. And you know, a traumatic brain injury rewires the brain. We're still trying to understand this. We have put this experience to good use. I've been on a team that has published 2 research papers regarding post-concussive care on the battlefield. We just worked with the Brain Trauma Foundation to develop a rapid readiness screening tool to be used in the austere environment to help capture that population of soldiers that have sustained some sort of concussive injury so they can get the care that they need.
Well, that's look, I appreciate the perspective. I imagine it's a terribly difficult thing to think about still. I know it's with you every day, but we appreciate you sharing that perspective today, and hopefully we can chat again soon. Alan Johnson from the great city of Duluth, Minnesota. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Ed.
President Obama steps back into the public eye. His rare remarks on President Trump and the future of American democracy. Stay with us. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. I'm Ed O'Keefe in for Major Garrett, trying to maintain the same level of customer service. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. Federal immigration officials have been denied access by team officials at Dodgers Stadium in Los Angeles. In a post on the team's social media account, they said ICE agents had requested permission to access the parking lots this morning, a claim ICE has now denied. Tonight's game against the San Diego Padres is set to be played as scheduled. If Major were here, he would tell you he's rooting for the Padres. On the president's schedule today, the signing of an executive order officially granting TikTok another extension. The company now has 90 more days to find a U.S. buyer or face a ban. The law went into effect in January over concerns TikTok's Chinese ownership poses a national security risk to the United States. This is the 3rd extension the president has signed. Oil prices are rising as the Israel-Iran conflict enters the 7th day. Crude oil futures rose more than a percentage point after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered Israel's military to intensify its attacks against Iran. Some states are already reporting a jump in prices at the pump. Iran is the 3rd largest producer of crude oil among OPEC members. Here now, with me at the table in Washington, Politico's national correspondent Braxton Booker and Matt Brown, congressional reporter for the Associated Press. Gentlemen, good to see you both. We mentioned this before the break. File this under, it would be getting much more attention if other things weren't going on. Former President Obama, in an appearance in Connecticut, was speaking out and expressing some concerns about how the United States may be slipping closer to autocracy. If we have it, let's play that, please.
We're not there yet completely, but I think that we are dangerously close to normalizing behavior like that. And we need people both outside government and inside of government saying, let's not go over that cliff.
It's kind of an extraordinary statement from a former president. I mean, he's not been silent about President Trump either in the first or now the second term. But to now be going there and saying, yeah, we're getting pretty close to what a lot of people fear, this is new territory.
Well, it's pretty telling. It's also telling of where the Democratic Party is, with not a strong enough kind of leadership in the current elected officials that can command the attention that Obama can. And so him going out on in Connecticut and having this conversation speaks to sort of the warning signs that he tried to impart on the country before the election in 2024, but seems like that fell on deaf ears. So this seems like it's his next attempt to try to push back at this, especially at someone who replaced him at the White House. But it is pretty extraordinary that it's Obama still kind of the singular voice in the Democratic Party that's getting so much attention.
And I know there's been some criticism that maybe he should be speaking out more. This seems to sort of create the space for fellow Democrats to say, I agree with him, because he's saying people inside and outside government got to be saying more. I mean, on Capitol Hill this week, Senator Padilla of California, recounting what happened to him last week with ICE agents and FBI agents in California, was talking about concerns with this. Other Democrats have been starting to speak up a little more about it.
Yes, I have to say, I mean, we saw on the campaign trail last year, Vice President Kamala Harris and many other Democrats literally used the word fascism to describe Trump's campaign trail. And this time on the Hill, in the past couple weeks and days, you've seen lawmakers express deep concern, deep emotion, both in the halls of Congress, outside on the steps, speaking to press about what they see as an existential and democratic crisis. This is not something that every single Democratic strategist is going to tell you this year or last year that is a winning message with many voters. But it is something that, because these lawmakers are the ones who are going through this experience right now, they're the ones who are arguing with their Republican colleagues or at times being detained by ICE, or in the case of one New Jersey Democrat having charges pressed against her. They are in the middle of this, and it is becoming a very visceral conversation. One thing just on Obama's comments, I do think it's important to note that he understood his audience there, where a lot of folks were talking about the top line of that this is an inflection point or a dangerous moment. But Obama has said that before. What he didn't say, what he also said later, was concerns over how a lot of people in his term, which he pointed out, felt that they could be as progressive as possible or believe in democracy, and there was no cost to it. And he actually made a comment in front of Heather Cox Richardson in Connecticut, a solidly blue state, that y'all are going to have to make changes. There's going to be costs now to what democracy is. He was making a call to action to lawyers, to professionals, notably not a call to action to Trump, not a call to action to Democratic lawmakers. So it's interesting where Obama thinks that he can focus this message right now on who he wants to even communicate with.
Real quick, since you cover the Hill, this congressional debate over what to do about the situation in Iran. There's a proposal in the House that's bipartisan. There's Tim Kaine over in the Senate, maybe trying to find some Republican support. But do either of these proposals go anywhere soon?
Well, I was focusing yesterday on, obviously I spoke with Senator Tim Kaine and got his input. He said that he was in conversations with Senate Majority Leader John Thune about potentially bringing the resolution sometime later this week or later next week.
He says that about a lot of things.
He says it about a lot of things, exactly. And when you speak with the Republican senators who control the majority in the upper chamber, and we'll see next week with the Republican House members, many of them were expressing clear support for President Trump in this moment. I mean, just yesterday, Senator Thom Tillis told me, I'm pro-regime change, so there's no level of pressure that can be put on the on the Iranian regime. Senator Jim Justice from West Virginia said that he'd be fine with some military action by the U.S. And Senator Ted Cruz made very clear no American boots on the ground. But he does believe deeply that we should be assisting Israel with whatever actions it wants to take.
And I know we were observing that today is Juneteenth, federal holiday. Most of official Washington and the government shut down. Mail-in being delivered. A lot of other people across the country have the day off. But this White House, in his second Trump term and the first Trump year since Juneteenth became a federal holiday, handling this holiday a little differently, perhaps, than in the Biden administration.
Yes, yes, and just to piggyback off the Iran and get to the Juneteenth in a second. Spoke with Governor Wes Moore today, and he's making some Juneteenth-related announcements. But we started a conversation talking about whether or not Trump was handling Iran sufficiently. And obviously, Wes Moore is an Army combat veteran, served in Afghanistan. He said, look, he's being too willy-nilly about putting lives at stake here. He's being very unserious about his handling with Iran, and he's calling on him to take this a lot more seriously. And obviously, this is in the context of Wes Moore perhaps running for president at some point. So seeing that critique on Juneteenth, on the same day that Wes Moore is making announcements of doing the work to repair in his state, meaning he's going to put some programs to help with some reparations type funding to help those who have been subject to redlining, was really an interesting conversation to have with him today. But as far as the Trump regime and kind of what they're doing with Juneteenth, very, very different from what Biden is doing. Certainly not the pageantry and the celebration of Juneteenth, but certainly they're leaning into kind of their changes and not playing up too much of an idea, too much emphasis on the holiday.
Yeah.
One thing I'll just note.
Real quick, because then we got to go. Go ahead.
One thing I'll just note on Juneteenth is that the Trump administration, they're not doing any observances that we know of at the moment of the holiday, which is not just a difference from the Biden administration. It's a difference from the first Trump administration, when every single year of the first term, he celebrated and issued proclamations in support of Juneteenth. So we're a little confused why they decided to change it this year, except for, obviously the broader conversations that the administration has been making about race. In terms of its many policies, but that should not necessarily affect Juneteenth. So we'll have to be doing more reporting to understand what changed between the two terms.
Well, Braxton Booker, Matt Brown, good to see you both. Come back anytime. Public lands in private hands. We'll explain. That's next. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Under the latest version of President Trump's budget bill, more than 2 million acres of federally controlled land in western states would be sold off and redeveloped for various purposes, including housing and other infrastructure. The land would be drawn from roughly 258 million acres of land eligible for sale, according to the nonprofit conservation organization, the Wilderness Society. That's more than half of the total number of acres managed by the U.S. Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service. My next guest is an environmentalist who's strongly opposed to this land sale. Benji Backer is the founder and CEO of the group Nature is Nonpartisan. Benji, thank you for being here. This is being pushed primarily by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, and he's defended it in part by saying, quote, the Senate bill does not authorize the sale of national parks, monuments, or wilderness. It identifies unused garden variety federal parcels for potential disposal, nothing more. What's your response?
Well, look, Teddy Roosevelt is rolling over in his grave, but the American people aren't rolling over here in America today. We have millions of Americans standing up and saying this is not okay across the political spectrum. This is not even just an 80-20 issue. Just 10% of Americans support the sale of this public land. And the thing that Mike Lee and others who support this measure don't understand is that just because something isn't a national park or a national wilderness area doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve to be in public hands. Some of my favorite moments in my life, and so many hunters and fishermen and women and hikers and skiers in their lives have been spent in U.S. Forest Service land and Bureau of Land Management land. That is the land that is up for sale. It is not just national parks that people recreate in and appreciate. Public lands were meant for public hands. Public lands were meant for public recreation and public consumption and time outdoors to make memories and connect with the land. That would be taken away with this proposal. It's absurd, but I'm also really glad to see that Republicans and Democrats together around the country are standing up. Some of the most far-right, far-left people all standing together to say this isn't okay, and it's time for the Senate to strike this provision from the bill and help Donald Trump also, because Donald Trump's legacy will not be good on conservation if this goes through.
You're a self-proclaimed conservative, and you say you're a conservationist as well. But why have this fight? Is the concern that if you let this little bit go, a lot more of it could go later?
Well, 3 million acres is a whole lot of land. And I hate that we bring it down to numbers. The environment isn't about numbers. You can't get this acreage back. You can't get nature back. The environment doesn't come back once you develop it. That is the sole purpose of this bill. This provision in the bill, by the way, is to solely develop it. If it was to transfer it to state ownership to manage the lands better or something like that, I think the American people could get behind that. But this is about ownership of private developers going in and developing more homes and more apartments and more businesses. And that's not something that the American people want. The most conservative thing in the world is to conserve. And the American legacy is largely around our conservation legacy, our beauty. People come across the world to see America's natural beauty. 3 million acres and turning that into bulldozing that for homes is not an American thing to do. And it also is a very slippery slope, like you were alluding to further action. But it also, again, it's not about percentages. These are 3 million acres of beautiful public land that we'd be taking advantage of and really destroying forever. You don't get that back. You don't get nature back. America has a legacy on conservation that it needs to uphold.
Real quick, the proponents of this also argue this helps address the housing crisis, especially in parts of the West where land's getting expensive, parts of Idaho, parts of Colorado, Arizona, the other states that are up for this. If not this, in providing this land for potential housing development, how would you propose addressing or coming up with solutions to address housing shortages?
Well, it's a pretty unanimous understanding that this is a real problem, right? Affordability and housing is a real problem, and the West is largely owned by the federal government in many states. But the answer is not a mass sell-off of our public land, especially some of the beautiful areas that you're seeing on the screen, which are up for sale in this proposal. It would be to help zone. It'd be for the cities and the counties to zone better, to permit better. If you look at all the studies done by universities and leading institutions, it's not that we need more space and more urban sprawl. It's that we need to actually make use of the space that we currently have, that it's not being permitted and not getting zoned for development, instead of going into nature any further. We have an obligation as humans to take care of our environment as we live near it. And just going further and further into it is actually degrading humanity. It might provide a short-term benefit, but long-term it hurts all of us. And so I'd urge Americans, especially those on the right, to reach out to their senators and to strike this provision. We have an opportunity to kill this. That doesn't mean we don't have to have conversations about affordability and the role of public lands in the West, but we have to kill this provision once and for all, and then move on to a more productive conversation.
Well, Benji Becker, I appreciate you sharing your side of the argument with us. We'll see how it goes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Next, Texas Congressman Greg Casar on President Trump's immigration crackdown. You are watching the Thursday edition of The Takeout. Welcome back. Before he left on his well-deserved vacation, Major Garrett spoke with the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Greg Casar of Texas. Here's that conversation.
Congressman, thanks for joining us. I need to consult my notes because this list keeps getting longer. Mayoral candidate in New York City, who's the comptroller of that city, arrested. Mayor of Newark, New Jersey, arrested. Sitting California senator, detained. A judge in Wisconsin, arrested and then prosecuted. A labor leader in California, arrested. All by federal immigration authorities, all under allegations that they either questioned too much, interfered too much, or in some cases, harmed federal immigration officials. How do you sum all of this up?
We're entering a scary time under the Trump administration where we're not just talking about the rights of immigrants being violated, we're talking about the rights of everyone being violated. In the case of U.S. Senator Padilla, Mr. Padilla was just doing his job, asking the DHS secretary tough questions that she'd been refusing to answer about U.S. citizens, and they arrested him. They threw him to the ground and arrested him. In the case of New York City Controller, the elected CFO of the biggest city in America, he was arrested, and you can see this on video, just for asking, hey, do you all have a warrant? Do you have a warrant for arresting this person? And he was arrested. To me, it's clear that the Trump administration is wanting to intimidate anyone who disagrees with them. They want to silence voices that are voices of dissent by saying, well, you could get arrested or you could get hurt without consequence. And that is growing autocracy in this country. And I think the way you fight back against growing autocracy is by firing up the engines of grassroots democracy. It's a time for people to speak out, to peacefully demonstrate, and to vote with their feet, to vote in local office, and to make very clear that this is endangering the rights of all of us. Every single one of us has a right to say, do you have a warrant? Every single one of us has a right to ask people in power questions without being thrown to the ground.
The Attorney General and the DHS Secretary say with some relish no one is above the law whenever asked about these various instances and episodes. That is a refrain that they want to bring back because it was used from their perspective against then-candidate Trump in the 2024 and 2023 years. They say you prosecuted Trump, meaning we're going to prosecute you. Nobody's above the law, and if you come anywhere close to violating the law, we're going to interpret it as such, arrest you, and prosecute you, possibly.
Look, this is gaslighting at its finest. Of course, if you significantly and truly are breaking the law, like, for instance, agitating January 6th rioters to break into the United States Capitol, desecrate the Capitol and try to kill members of Congress, and then attack police officers who subsequently die. Of course, there's a real problem with that. But going and asking a cabinet secretary a simple question, or going and asking on behalf of a constituent, do you have a warrant for this constituent? That is not breaking the law. In fact, it's just doing our job. So we can't get accustomed to or consider that it's normal for the President of the United States and his administration to gaslight us in this way.
You mentioned grassroots politics. You will be with Bernie Sanders, if I understand it correctly, in Amarillo and Fort Worth for what you hope will be large rallies. Why?
I'm doing something a little different in Texas here with Senator Bernie Sanders. We are going and visiting Republican-controlled areas of Texas, going and talking to those Texans who feel left behind, frankly, by both political parties. So we're going to the Rio Grande Valley, where in McAllen, now that's a Republican-controlled congressional district, an area of the country that's been heavily covered because of Latino voters, that many of whom started voting for Donald Trump but now are starting to have their regrets. We're going to go talk to them. Amarillo, Texas, a place that so many politicians skip over from both parties. We're going to go and talk to those folks who feel like they've been left behind. And they're in the heart of Texas and Fort Worth, sort of in rodeo country, going and talking to voters who are like, look, we may disagree on this social issue or that one, but right now the billionaires are taking our money and they're taking our health care, and they want to see a Democratic Party that's willing to fight back. So we're going and talking about how this doesn't just have to be red versus blue. It can be the billionaires versus everyone else. And we're going to talk to everyone else in the country and everyone else in Texas, especially places that have been left behind.
You spoke to issues related to war powers, the presidency, and consultation with Congress and the Biden administration. You are now doing so in the Trump administration. Why?
We have to be very clear that the United States Constitution says that the President of the United States, no matter their political party, cannot send our American men and women into war without having a conversation with the country and without having the consent of the United States Congress. That's the law. And that's why I, even as a Democrat, would sign on every time and vote every time for resolutions that said President Biden could not unilaterally go to war. That way, when there's President Trump, I'm not being a hypocrite by saying he cannot unilaterally go to war. We, not so long ago, had a diplomatic deal, an agreement with Iran that kept us from going to war and kept Iran from having a nuclear weapon. We should pursue every path to diplomacy to prevent a nuclear weapon from existing in Iran, rather than risking sending our American women and men who signed up for the service to go risk their lives, not just for one operation, but as we've learned in the Middle East, when you get started, you could be there for years, or even worse, a generation. And so we should not just quickly allow any one president or the prime minister of a foreign nation to set our timeline or get our troops involved in a war. That's not the way the Constitution works.
Congressman, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
That's it for the Takeout today. We'll clear your plates for you. I'm Ed O'Keefe in for Major Garrett. Stick around. The Daily Report is coming up next here on CBS News 24/7.